It was a typical flight, or so it seemed. But for one woman, what began as a simple trip turned into an unexpected showdown that would have her standing up for herself in a way she never imagined. A father, traveling with his child, demanded that the woman move from her seat, an innocent request that quickly escalated into something far more shocking. But little did he know, his request would set off a chain of events that no one on board could have predicted. As the situation unfolded, the tension in the cabin was palpable. The woman, minding her own business, couldn't believe her ears when the father insisted she get up. His tone was commanding, and his eyes were full of expectation, but what he didn't count on was the flight attendant stepping in. What happened next left everyone stunned. The flight attendant didn't side with the father, but instead she backed the woman, refusing to let this injustice go unnoticed. What could have been a quiet disagreement turned into a powerful moment of support and understanding. But what made this story even more incredible was how the flight attendant, with calm authority, stood her ground and changed the course of the situation. Why did the flight attendant take her side? How did the other passengers react? And what happened when the father realized he was not going to get what he wanted? Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't want to miss. The woman, whose name was Maya, had settled into her seat for a quiet, peaceful flight. She was just looking forward to getting home after a long week of work. With her headphones on, she barely noticed the man and his young child boarding. It wasn't until they reached her row that things began to take a strange turn. The man, dressed in business attire, stood with his daughter at his side, scanning the seats. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the hum of the plane. "I need you to move. My daughter should be sitting here." Maya, caught off guard, looked up at him confused. The seat was assigned to her, and she had no intention of giving it up. "I'm sorry, but this is my seat," she replied politely, trying to diffuse the tension. She didn't expect him to respond like this. But the father wasn't having it. His voice grew sharper as he repeated his request, this time with a sense of entitlement. "I'm sorry, but my daughter needs to sit here. I can't have her sitting next to a stranger." His eyes glanced down at the girl, who seemed oblivious to the tension building in the air. Maya, feeling the pressure, stood up and glanced around the cabin. She thought, for a moment, about just moving to avoid further conflict. But before she could act, the flight attendant, a woman in her late 30s, approached with a calm yet firm expression. She had seen the whole interaction from the front of the plane and wasn't about to let it escalate further. The man turned to the flight attendant, expecting her to back him up. But what happened next would shake him to the core. The flight attendant, named Lisa, approached with a kind of calm authority that made everyone around her pause. She had worked these flights for years and had seen her fair share of tense moments, but something about this one felt different. As she reached the row, her eyes immediately locked onto Maya's, signaling to her that she wasn't alone in this. "Sir," Lisa said, her voice cool but firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to step back for a moment." The father looked at Lisa with frustration growing in his eyes. "I don't think you understand," he began, his tone escalating. "This is my daughter's seat, and she's not going to sit next to a stranger. I want her moved here now." Lisa remained unflinching, her gaze steady. "This is a dispute between you and the passenger, not something that involves her. I'm not going to ask her to move." She glanced at Maya to make sure she was okay before returning her attention to the father. "I'm asking you to sit down, or I will have to call for assistance." Maya was frozen, feeling the weight of the entire cabin's attention on her. It was rare to feel so vulnerable in a public space, but something about the father's anger had left her unsettled. The passengers around them were starting to whisper, and she could sense that the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Some people were looking at the father, others at Maya, unsure of what would happen next. The tension was unbearable. The father was not backing down, but neither was Lisa. Maya's heart raced as she tried to steady her breathing. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself, but the words felt stuck in her throat. She glanced at the little girl beside him, who was nervously tugging on her father's sleeve, clearly caught in the middle of something far beyond her understanding. Would the father push this further? Would the flight attendants side with him? Or was Lisa's intervention enough to keep the peace? The uncertainty hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The tension in the cabin was unbearable, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The father stood there, fists clenched at his sides, his eyes locked on Lisa. He wasn't going to back down. "You don't understand," he repeated, his voice rising. "I don't care about your rules. I need her to move. Now." Maya's stomach twisted as the father's words cut through the air. She had never been in a situation like this before, and it was starting to feel like more than just a seating dispute. It was personal. The father's insistence on his daughter sitting in that seat made it clear he wasn't just trying to make a simple request. He was using his child to manipulate the situation, to force Maya into a position where she had no choice but to give in. Lisa didn't budge. "Sir, I'm asking you one last time to return to your seat. This is not how we handle things on this flight. If you don't comply, I'll have to take further action." The father's face turned red with frustration. He glanced around the cabin, clearly hoping that the passengers would support him. But all he saw were eyes watching intently, some sympathetic, others with a mix of confusion and uncertainty. Maya could feel her gaze, but it was Lisa's calm, unwavering stance that was giving her the courage to stand her ground. The little girl, still holding onto her father's sleeve, seemed more and more uneasy. Maya's heart ached for her. She had no idea what her father was doing, but she could feel the tension too. She glanced up at Lisa, hoping she was right to trust her. Would Lisa be able to de-escalate the situation before things got worse? The uncertainty was suffocating. The father stepped closer to Lisa, his voice low but full of fury. "You're making a mistake." His words hung in the air, heavy with menace. Maya's pulse quickened. What would happen next? The father's voice, low but menacing, echoed in Maya's ears. "You're making a mistake." His words cut through the tension, and for a brief moment, it felt like the entire cabin froze in time. Lisa stood her ground, not flinching under the pressure, but something in his tone sent a chill through the air. It wasn't just anger now, it was something darker, something that made Maya's heart race faster. But just as Lisa opened her mouth to respond, there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. A woman in the row behind them, an older passenger who had been watching quietly, stood up. "Is everything okay here?" Her voice was soft, but carried a weight of experience, as if she had seen enough in her lifetime to know when things were about to escalate. The father turned to her, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped. But the woman didn't back down. Instead, she took a step closer, her eyes narrowing with a quiet authority that made everyone in the vicinity pay attention. "I think it does," she said firmly. "If you're causing trouble, it concerns everyone on this flight." Her words were simple, yet they struck like a bolt of lightning, sending a ripple through the passengers. Some of them shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with how far the situation had gone. Maya watched the father's face twist with rage, and then, in a split second, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Maya could feel the air grow thicker. What was this? Was he threatening them? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The flight attendant, Lisa, took a step back, her expression unreadable. The stakes had just gotten much higher. What was on that paper, and why did the father think it would change everything? The father unfolded the paper with a deliberate motion, holding it up for Lisa and the others to see. "This," he said, his voice cold, "is my daughter's ticket to a special seat. It was assigned to her by the airline. I'm not asking for a favor, I'm asserting my rights." The paper, printed with official-looking text, looked like a confirmation of some sort, something that seemed to give him the upper hand. Maya felt a momentary flash of dread. Had she misjudged the situation? Was this a legitimate claim? The tension in the cabin grew thicker as the passengers waited for Lisa's response. Lisa, however, wasn't fazed. She glanced at the paper quickly, then locked eyes with the father. I see, she said calmly, her voice unwavering. But this is still a misunderstanding. You were assigned this seat for your daughter, but this one, she pointed to Maya's, was not meant to be exchanged. The airline only overbooked, and you weren't told that. The father's jaw clenched. What are you implying? I'm implying, Lisa replied, her voice steady, but there was an error. You're not entitled to take anyone's seat just because of a mistake on the airline's part. The father stood silent for a moment, his anger simmering beneath the surface. But then, a soft voice cut through the stillness. It was the young girl, the one who had been silently standing beside her father all this time. She tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide with innocence. "Daddy," she said quietly, "I don't want to make anyone sad." For the first time, the father's expression faltered. His eyes softened, just a little, as he looked down at his daughter. The weight of his actions seemed to hit him all at once. Before he could say anything, the flight attendant stepped forward, her hand gently placed on Maya's shoulder. "I think it's time we all move forward," she said. The father's face hardened again, but this time his defeat was clear. The battle was over. Just as things seemed to settle, a final twist came from the back of the plane. The same older woman who had intervened earlier now stood, her own seatbelt fastened. "You know," she said with a sly smile, "I was wondering why my seat was so uncomfortable. I'm actually sitting in your daughter's seat. And guess what? I don't mind at all." The father's face drained of color as the entire plane burst into subdued chuckles. The situation, once fraught with tension, had come full circle. The seats, it turned out, were all mixed up, and the man had been fighting for the wrong one all along. The cabin erupted into light laughter, the tension lifting like a weight off everyone's shoulders. The father stood frozen for a moment, his face slowly turning red with embarrassment as the older woman settled back into her seat. The reality of the situation seemed to dawn on him, and he glanced at his daughter, who was looking up at him with wide, confused eyes. It wasn't just the seating mix-up that had caught him off guard. It was the realization that his actions had spiraled out of control. Maya, still in her seat, couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. The entire scene had taken a toll on her, and she was grateful that it was finally over. Lisa, the flight attendant, gave her a reassuring smile, and Maya nodded her thanks. The calm professionalism Lisa had shown in the face of the father's aggression had not only de-escalated the situation, but had also reminded everyone around them of the importance of standing up for what's right. The father, now visibly humbled, apologized to Maya and Lisa, though it felt like a half-hearted gesture. It was clear that he had come to terms with the absurdity of the conflict, but it was hard to shake off the weight of his earlier behavior. The flight continued without incident, and Maya, though shaken, felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about having stood her ground in a moment that could have easily gone another way. As the plane descended toward its destination, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The passengers were chatting, laughing, and a few even exchanged glances with Maya, nodding in silent recognition. The journey had started with an unexpected conflict, but it had ended with a reminder of how, sometimes, the smallest acts of courage and compassion could bring a tense situation to a peaceful resolution. For Maya, the lesson was clear. No matter how small or insignificant a conflict might seem, standing up for yourself and for others can make all the difference.